Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Anchor Watch. I'm your host, Bobby Jones, and I can tell you right now, we're going to get right into it. We're very honored to have a young firebrand. You may have heard his story. He is attorney Ryan W. Powers. Now, do not let his youthful appearance fool you. This man has lived quite an experience here within the last year. But the reason we have him on is because there are some people that talk about standing up to tyranny, to things that they know are fundamentally wrong, and then there are others that do it. And we're going to try to highlight people who do it. So, Ryan, if you could please just give a little bit about your background and what happened to you that basically sent you on a different path.
Of course. Well, first of all, thanks, Bobby, for having me. I really appreciate it and happy to be here to talk about this stuff. So I'm an attorney. I went to Harvard for law school. I've been practicing a couple years now, and I worked at a big law firm. And when the Trump administration began targeting big law firms back in March, there was certainly a very, very big wave of concern from the legal community. The big law firms began capitulating, signing deals with the president in order to basically avoid any sort of penalty from the federal government. And I started writing op-eds. I thought it was important to be educating people about the law, particularly folks who are non-lawyers, because it's very confusing. It's hard to understand. So I wrote one op-ed about Palantir, which is Peter Thiel's company, and the ways in which Palantir and the federal government were able to work together in order to store, mine, and basically compile the personal data of millions of Americans. I thought that was very unconstitutional. I thought it was something we should be speaking about. I ended up writing about it. My firm called me in, basically told me to stop. I said I refuse to do so because this is important knowledge that I think should go out. And then when I refused to stop, they fired me. So now I'm doing a lot more legal analysis, and I'm more plugged in than ever to the state of democracy today and the ways in which the federal government seems to be very hell-bent on eroding that.
Wow. So basically you stood up for what you believe is right. And to be honest, and to be totally transparent, I believe history will find you right in the long run. What made you do that? I mean, dude, you're a Harvard law grad. You're at one of the best firms in America. That's not only, pretty advantageous, it's lucrative, it's prestigious. Why would you just sit on business and say, I'm not doing it, I'm going to continue to write?
Because I thought it was important because of my position, particularly because of the power that I had as an attorney at, like you said, one of the most powerful firms really in the world, right? When we come from a position of privilege, I think as attorneys, especially where we're educated on the law, how it should operate, what we can do to protect it, to not be educating people during a time of, I think, unprecedented constitutional decay, I think is irresponsible. We swear an oath. We stand up in front of a judge. We say we're going to uphold the law. And that may not mean much to some other attorneys. It means a lot to me. It's something I take very seriously because I think without a rule of law, we fundamentally don't have a democracy. And when there were so many things happening earlier this spring through the present that we're seeing from the president, it's something that I think we needed to take action on. And I knew how to write a little bit. I knew how to take complicated legal issues and distill them into plain English. And it's something that I thought was really, really important to be doing. I mean, before I was a lawyer, I didn't understand the power that these firms had. I didn't understand the influence. I didn't understand the law really at all. And I think to be able to be in a position where you have more power and privilege than most other attorneys in America, in the world, and do nothing is really irresponsible. And it's something that I felt very deeply conflicted about just sitting there and doing nothing on, particularly when, again, we are in a very unprecedented era. I mean, this is the time to do it. So if we're not doing it now, we may not have a democracy to come back to.
Let me ask you this. Why did these big firms famously basically capitulate to Trump earlier this spring and summer? They just basically threw in the towel when obviously the talent of attorneys are in their stables, not necessarily the Trump administrations. Why did they just basically roll over in a lot of respects?
Yeah, it was really shocking, Bobby. I don't fully understand it myself, but I can try to walk through their logic. These are firms that historically have been fairly progressive. They've done a lot of free legal work on behalf of immigration, on behalf of LGBTQ plus rights. on behalf of racial justice, right? These are firms that have contributed hundreds of thousands of dollars of legal services to causes that are traditionally progressive. And then when the Trump administration began stepping in and saying, hey, we may threaten your federal contracts, right? We may threaten your business. We could influence your clients in ways that are going to be very detrimental for all of your attorneys. And instead of fighting back, the vast majority of firms signed deals of up to $125 million of pro bono free legal services on behalf of causes aligned with the federal government. And that's not to say that all firms did this. There are a lot of big law firms like Perkins Coie, like Covington, that have certainly stepped up and have fought with litigation and rallied other big law firms to fight back against some of these, what I believe are unlawful executive orders by the president. But the vast majority just decided it would be easier or perhaps more lucrative for them to just roll over. And it's not something that we've seen even in Trump 1.0. It's something that we're seeing for the first time now in ways that I find very concerning.
Wow. And you're right. This version of Trump 2.0 has been a heck of a lot more aggressive, especially on the legal front. They're proactive instead of reactive. And along those lines, the Supreme Court had a major decision yesterday regarding immigration ICE. And can you explain to us non-lawyers why it was a big deal?
Yeah, absolutely. So the case is Vasquez Perdomo v. Noem. And initially, there was a case filed by immigrant workers, advocacy groups, think like Public Counsel, ACLU SoCal. They brought the case claiming that ICE and DHS were stopping people who looked Latino, targeting people who spoke Spanish or had accents, focusing primarily on day labor sites, bus stops, car washes, and construction jobs, and raiding immigrant-heavy neighborhoods. So the plaintiffs in this case, so the folks who brought the case, argue that these practices were akin to racial profiling and violated the Fourth Amendment against unlawful search and seizure. So basically, a district court judge, so beneath the Supreme Court, issued a temporary restraining order on these practices, right, stating that they were unconstitutional. It went up to a higher court, the Ninth Circuit, which upheld that, indeed, these were unlawful searches and seizures. And the federal government, the Trump administration, basically said that we want to overturn this because we think we should keep doing this. And we think that these practices from ICE and DHS are absolutely fine. And the Supreme Court stepped in and just yesterday ruled in a 6-3 ruling that the Trump administration's emergency request to basically pause the injunction and make sure that ICE and DHS could continue on with these practices, they got through. The Supreme Court cleared it, and they said this is fine. So now what that means is ICE and DHS can once again factor in race, language, ethnicity, location as part of a reasonable suspicion in order to question somebody. Justice Kavanaugh, who wrote the major opinion for this, or I get it's sort of it's called a shadow opinion because it's basically expedited, and I can explain what that means a little bit more. But basically, Justice Kavanaugh said that ethnicity and race and all these other factors can be used as part of the total picture. So they can be relevant factors when combining others and establishing reasonable suspicion. And what that means is up anyone's guess. Reasonable suspicion can be, you see someone walking down the street and you don't like how they're walking, and they also happen to be a race that may make them suspicious to you, right? So it could really be anything. And the three more progressive-leaning justices, Justice Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson, warned that the ruling effectively permits racial profiling. And that's the latest now. So immigration raids and workplace bus stop sweeps in LA can resume using those factors as methods to stop people. Latino and immigrant communities, particularly low-wage workers, can face renewed targeting. It really is a heavy step in the direction of racial profiling and making sure that's nationalized. It's not a final case; it's a temporary case, but for the time being, as recently as present as right now, ICE, DHS can continue using these factors and stopping people, and it's really concerning for anybody concerned about civil rights and liberties today.
Right. It's I mean, this goes back to stop and frisk or pull over. I mean, the ramifications of what was passed can go deep. And make no mistake, ICE, DHS, they have basically swept up American citizens. They've done it to veterans if they look or sound a certain way. But if anybody, in my humble opinion, is apprehended without just cause, without a warrant, all these things, that should be enough to make everybody ticked off. But instead, we keep moving this goalpost. And it's funny you mentioned Amy Coney Barrett. So we were talking before we came on about the interview she did with Nora O'Donnell on CBS. She had the nerve and audacity to say that the Supreme Court is not a partisan body and that, they're independent and that the American people should have full faith, confidence, and trust in them. What are your thoughts on that statement?
I think it is a different reality than most Americans are living in. I think that the Supreme Court is, and really always has been since its inception, been a very partisan institution. I mean, you see this from judges, not even just in the Supreme Court, but all across America, all across the world. I mean, very famously, Trump was very involved, along with Elon Musk, in a Supreme Court of Wisconsin race back in March of this year. And even though the judges themselves weren't necessarily aligned on paper in writing with any particular political party, you were seeing very clearly backed Trump, Elon Musk candidate, and you were seeing a very clearly backed, more leftist candidate. And so you can pretend or have this facade of impartiality. And I like to believe that there are some judges who are truly nonpartisan, but a lot of these decisions coming out of the Supreme Court reflect something that is very deeply partisan. It's something that I think really underscores the court's majority right now of having more right-leaning figures and deferring to Trump's executive power. It reflects a pattern, I think, of when there's some sort of national security or immigration issue, the court allows really expansive government power, even at the expense of individual rights. It's tilting the balance of power, where the Supreme Court is really supposed to step in and put a check and balance on the president toward really just being a force on behalf of the president. It leads our traditional balances that we're supposed to have as part of a government here. And it's something that I think is really pervasive. And you're seeing more and more of it, and you're seeing it become more deeply partisan as time goes on.
It's funny you mentioned that too, because I distinctly remember here in the past few weeks that the Trump administration has basically made it known that the only court that they're going to listen to is SCOTUS, the Supreme Court. Can you just briefly, because I'm trying to wrap my mind around what that means. What does that mean when he can ignore district courts, lower courts, this, that, and the other? He's only going to listen to the Supreme Court, of which, 4 of which he put on the bench. What does that mean and why?
I think that there's a lot of timing problems. So that's really the center of the argument, is that there are technically courts that can stop many of these actions that the Trump administration is just rolling through because they're unprecedented. I believe they're unconstitutional. They violate existing laws. But the problem is the federal government can act functionally overnight, and it will take, weeks, months, years of lawsuits in order to really undo the actions of the federal government. So if the Trump administration chooses to, flagrantly disobey the law and disregard a ruling from a lower court, they can functionally do that until there's a lawsuit or some sort of a stop or an injunction in order to stop that. So technically, he's correct insofar as the federal government has really unfettered power to put in motion a lot of very unconstitutional measures. And there are certainly lower courts that can stop that, but it takes time. It's not something that really overnight a judge could rule on or push back on. I mean, you have to think about the labor involved alone, where these briefs to get even in front of a judge or start to question some of these executive orders coming from the president take a very long time to put together. These are briefs that sometimes are 50, 100, 150 pages long, and you're dealing with really a deficit of lawyers right now who are even willing to stand up for the rule of law. And so with all of those things combined, I think it's a very, very hard time to check the president via the courts, really at any level.
It's funny. Basically, what you're telling me is the administrative paperwork and timeline is being used as a tactical advantage for Trump. That's quite amazing. And that leads into another major question: the National Guard deployment to Washington, D.C., and now proposed to other cities, specifically Chicago. In your view, I know what my view is from a former military person, but in your view, legally, is this allowed and is it sustainable?
Yeah, I think speaking specifically about DC first here,
Hmm.
unfortunately, it currently, to my earlier point, is allowed, but it's very murky. So basically,
Hmm.
the president issued Executive Order 14333, and that was about a month ago. It invokes Section 740 of the DC Home Rule Act to basically
Hmm.
say there's a crime emergency in Washington, D.C. And the order requires Mayor Muriel Bowser to make the police department available for federal purposes and delegated operational control to the Attorney General.
Hmm.
At the time, the administration has mobilized around 800 members of the DC National Guard, which is really under the president's direct command because there's no governor. And
Right.
what's really interesting and what I think is murky about this is, again, the federal government is citing very specific sections in order to have some authority here. But this is really the first time we're seeing that I'm aware of where Section 740 has ever been used to place DC's local police under federal direction. The Guard presence has now expanded in DC to over 2,000 troops, including many out of state units brought in under federal authority. And the White House is basically justifying this by saying, look, there's a directive that says we can do this in order to restore and support public order. And just recently, we saw the District of Columbia sued the Trump administration. I think it was
Right.
September 4th, maybe about 5 days
Hmm.
ago, arguing
Hmm.
that federal takeover violated the Home Rule Act and another adjacent act, which actually restricts military involvement in civilian law
Hmm.
enforcement. And the case remains in litigation. So it's
Hmm.
unclear really which direction it'll play out in, because again, these are very unprecedented moves in a very unprecedented time. But it risks normalizing a form of military occupation that I think could
It's
be
that part.
really dangerous across America, as we're seeing in Chicago right now, too, or at least the beginning stages of it.
Right. And I'm glad you brought up the difference here, DC and Chicago. DC being the federal district, its own section in the Constitution, et cetera. That's one thing. But to roll the National Guard into a state without the governor requesting it, that's a rare thing. I've told people like that happened in Little Rock, Arkansas, to integrate schools after the Supreme Court. That's how serious that move is. What are we risking? And is it legal for President Trump to do this in Illinois?
This is the question of the hour, and it's something that I think everyone is keeping a very close eye on, particularly as the president has suggested that these initiatives are going to expand to other cities and other states.
Mhm.
I think that where federal authority ends is when emergency ends, right? So if the federal government is saying that crime in Chicago is an emergency that requires federal power and federal intervention, um, sure, but it's something that, are you going to classify an emergency over something that is taking course over months or years, or when does it
Mhm.
end? So what is the emergency that we are defining here in order to implement these laws? And if it's not a real true situational emergency like the one that you just cited, which is very
Mhm.
contained, then what are the limitations on that? And so it's again, it's a level of intervention where you're seeing uh, real hostility, I think, from the federal government and unwillingness to work with the governors, the mayors of these various places. And I think it's creating all of these really big questions about the law and the Constitution that otherwise we've never
Mhm.
really had to face. Because if there has been more of a discrete incident where the president has need to move the National Guard in, whether it's to a city or to a state, you've typically seen a high level of cooperation with
Right.
the actors involved, right? So JB Pritzker is maybe less inclined to work with the Trump administration, doesn't agree with what he's doing, the president, related to deploying the National Guard in DC and the ways in which it's now, being pushed into Chicago, at least on its face. And so you're not going to see the real partnership that you otherwise have seen in the past. So there's no real
Mhm.
blueprint here for when push comes to shove.
Mhm.
how are you classifying emergency? What exactly are the conversations looking like, if any, between the governors of these states and the president? And where do we go from here? What does this mean for other states? And I think all of those questions are very unclear.
Right. And I think you hit it on the head. What does this mean for other states? What has obviously been very interesting to people is the cities that he has repeatedly mentioned as far as being target. They have a couple of things in common. They're in blue states led by blue mayors. I think all of them are minority mayors as well, Black or Latino. But when you look at crime rate statistics, there are cities that have higher crime rates in red states that conveniently are being left off of this list. And the other thing that I would tell our viewers is understand, I'll say it again and again, the National Guard is not trained to be law enforcement officers, period. Active duty military, we are not trained to do that. There are things, force, use of force continuums, escalation, de-escalation, that the military does not waste time learning, because when we deploy, we are there to kill people and break things on behalf of the United States. And for Trump to release his little Truth Social tweet about, the apocalypse now meme of, war, deportation, etc., ironically, based on a movie that was based on Vietnam that he conveniently skipped, I think shows the intent. This is not about law enforcement. This is about straight intimidation. That's just my feeling on it, Ryan. I don't know if you agree or disagree, but it seems pretty obvious from my standpoint.
Absolutely. And I think you hit on a really interesting point that I actually want to take a step further, is the cities being targeted are really led by Black and brown people. And they are not cities that I think otherwise are really the profile that the Trump administration has indicated that they plan on supporting, right? I wouldn't be surprised if, in this vein, my home city of Philadelphia was next. I think that there's a high degree of selective enforcement and selective persecution of certain cities, certain individuals, that has become ingrained in the laws and the selective strategies of the Trump administration. And you're seeing this really in higher education as well, with the causes that the Trump administration is choosing to selectively enforce or support, such as anti-Semitism, but ignoring and even flagrantly defying much of the DEI initiatives that have really been rolled out over the past however many years. So it's really just this systemic selective enforcement about whatever really the Trump administration is deciding at a given point in time is really important for them to support or not. And I think that's a real problem too, when we're talking about things like civil rights and equity in this country.
You're dead on. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because a lot of these cities that he's targeting, the crime rates have actually gone down, being led by this, Philadelphia, Baltimore, especially DC. They have had initiatives that ironically were funded by the federal government under the previous administration to bring crime rates down. And now they have been defunded. So it's almost like, hey, let's cause the crisis so we can roll the American Gestapo in with guys who are not trained to be there. We're not peacekeepers in the military. So it's a diabolical cocktail of administrative, economic, and military policy that literally is going to put America on this tipping point. The last thing I want to get you out of here on this, Ryan, and I can't thank you enough for this perspective. Out of everything you've seen legally, constitution-wise, legally, since Trump has come back into office in 2025, what concerns you the most? What keeps you up at night? What makes you say, what? We're doing what? And you do the double take.
I think it's the deference to executive power, whether it's judges, whether it's law firms, whether it's higher education. I think the ways in which these very powerful institutions have power to really fight back and resist, and some of them are, to their credit, but are choosing not to, most of them. And I think that's something that is very troubling to me. I think it suggests that on very serious issues of national security, of immigration, civil rights, civil liberties, we are really entering a stage of slow authoritarianism. I mean, there's been a lot of writing done on this from some of my favorite professors really across the country, in every major outlet you can think of, that political economists and lawyers and judges are really rallying together to say, hey, this is early stage authoritarianism. It reflects a pattern where the executive branch has very little disregard or very little regard for the rule of law. And it's sort of wrapped up in this idea that the Trump administration can do really whatever they want, and they're not concerned about upholding any of the norms, whether it's within the federal government, the Constitution, the legal system that we've built this country on. And I think that's alarming, not only for the state of this presidency. If we have a free and fair election in 2028, I think there's still going to be a lot of damage remaining. I think there's still going to be a lot of rulings and a lot of institutions that are going to have to somehow come back to this. I mean, I don't know how you go into a law firm that has struck a deal with the president who is trying to actively erode the rule of law. And once we have a new president, if we have a new president, I think it's going to be hard for them to erase that legacy. I think the same thing is true for admissions, right? When you're looking at schools like Columbia or Brown, which have capitulated to the president, signed very lucrative deals, contributing hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't know how you come back from that. And it's less important, I think, for any one institution or law firm or a judge, but it's more important when you look at all of these systems interacting with one another and saying, not only are we in a time of democratic backsliding, but how are we going to get out of it even at the end of this? And will these institutions be able to help us even then? Or have they done so much damage that they've lost credibility, that they're struggling to even maintain a veneer of neutrality or impartiality when we move into the next decade of what American democracy looks like? And these institutions have been so bedrock and so foundational to securing and creating and protecting and defending our democracy that it really makes me very uncertain and very concerned about what the next chapter of American politics is going to look like.
Ryan Powers, I could not sum it up any better if I tried, and believe me, I've tried. I think that's what I think you're nailing everything. That's what we have to be concerned about. There is some permanent damage being done, and I personally don't know how we get back. So please, people, check out his Substack, The Power Project. We're going to definitely have links to his page. If you want some concise breaking down of what you're hearing to cut through the legalese, this is where you need to go. The man stood on business, as the young people would say nowadays, and he paid a price for it. But, you know, to defend freedom, sometimes you have to sacrifice. You have to. And Ryan, I appreciate you doing what you could moving forward, and we'd love to have you back here in the near future, because if a ruling comes down that I don't understand, just stand by. We will be in touch. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Bobby. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's young people like him that give me hope that we can eventually pull out of this. But I think he's 100% right. Professors who study this for a living have hit on this. We are in these early stages of authoritarianism, and it's not just because it's Trump, it's because the checks and balances that have run America for 200 plus years are not doing the job. Congress is at the forefront of that, but the court system is being compromised as well. But it's so bad that even the Supreme Court at times has pushed back against this naked grab for power from the executive branch. That is not how it works. We've talked about this in American Civics 101. That will be coming back here in a couple of weeks as well, to continue our walk, not just through the Constitution, but how this government is supposed to work. Now, that being said, I want to go ahead and bring in our illustrious producer, Sam, because I need him to help me understand some things that are going on in America just in the last week. Sam, how you doing this evening?
Good. And Bobby, you don't need my help understanding anything. I need your help. That's why we brought you here.
Listen, there are a couple of things that have jumped in my craw this past week, and I'm going to kind of go in an order because I think it's all connected. First, again, me being a former naval officer, an old salt, as they would say in the Navy, I served my entire 26-year career under the Department of Defense. But according to President Trump and Secretary of Defense Hegseth, that term is no longer good enough, and they wanted something more aggressive. So they wanted the, quote, Department of War. I think this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my entire life, and I'm going to tell you why. Okay. For those who don't know, the United States Defense Department Molly, great question, Molly. The reason this happened in the first place, so the first, all the way up until 1947, we had a Department of War. And we had a Department of War and a Department of the Navy. It was weird. War just meant you fought you had an army, you fought this, that, and the other. Well, in 1947, after, the largest conflict in human history that involved nuclear bombs, 60 million to 100 million people killed in less than a decade, the world wanted to pivot from such an aggressive mindset because they figured out quickly war is hell. And mind you, the people that fought in World War II, you literally had some of them who fought in World War One.
Right.
So they participated, Sam, in wars that killed over 100 million people. And so with the reorganization of the Department of War, part of it was because there was a lot of conflict in the upper chains of command in the United States military. MacArthur and his ego, and yes, Army people, I said it, his ego against, Nimitz and his practicality in the Pacific. That's a whole other conversation we can have. I know there's some Army veterans who are probably making their fist. Right. But because of that conflict at the highest levels of the War Department, and FDR personally having to step in and change things, Congress reorganized how we set up our national defense apparatus. And the National Defense Act of 1947 came. It created the United States Air Force as its own separate service, and it changed the name to Department of Defense. Part of the reasoning was we were creating these alliances like NATO to try to ensure that we did not have the mass casualty war that we had just went through. Meaning defense, meaning, hey, we're not reaching or looking to attack others. We're trying to, hey, we will respond if defended upon. The Japanese Empire after World War II, they no longer had a military, they had a self-defense force, which is still called to this day. The world made it a priority to create peace. So Sam, my question for you, if you hear a change from Department of Defense to Department of War, you as just the average American citizen, what is your immediate thought?
I mean, I don't know. I'm chronically online and I watch your shows all the time. So I'm not the average American. But it's definitely an aggressive stance, right? It is macho and it is dangerous. And I think we at Lincoln Square, we've been having this conversation about, and I've been having this conversation with you as well. It feels on some level like distraction. He's, wanting to just make these big statements and all this kind of thing. But the problem is, in diplomacy and in world affairs, language really, really matters. And it's why, right? It's why diplomacy takes so long, because you have to get the language exactly right. And this is like, it's just scattershot, distraction level stuff, real consequences. I'm really curious. The language of deterrence, for example. In the United States, we build the greatest military in the history of the world as a function of sort of deterrence. In other words, we don't want to use it.
Right.
This feels like a fundamental shift in that philosophy. What are your thoughts on that?
Bingo. So you're getting to where I'm thinking. Deterrence means, hey, I don't want to attack because I know they have it. But what has happened under the Trump-Hegseth administration is the Department of Defense is now being used as proactive, almost provocative chess pieces. So, for example, the ARG that's off the coast of Venezuela, for those who don't know, ARG is Amphibious Ready Group, meaning when you hear amphibious in the Navy in the same sentence, that means there are Marines on board.
Wow.
Yeah, it scares me. Yeah, I'm a vet and it scares me.
Maxine is not average, by the way.
No, she is not. She's made some very, very smart comments here in the past. But I'm telling you now, when you have 2,000 Marines off the coast of a country, when you not only send the ARG, which is supposed to drop Marines off in a hostile environment, but you send what we call crew dead ships, cruisers, destroyers that have hundreds of missiles, have air defense capability with them, and then you use those capabilities to literally wipe off the face of a planet a drug running ship, which, by the way, people, we have this thing called the United States Coast Guard. That's their job, not the Navy's. The Navy can do it, but is the job of American Coast Guardsmen to do that. See, yeah, right. This right here, J.D. Vance, the guy who served in the Green Zone in Iraq as a photographer for the Marines, killing cartel members who poison our fellow citizens, the highest and best use of our military. And then Brian said, killing civilians of another nation who are civilians without any due process called a war crime. And J.D. Vance, I don't give a shit what you call it, because J.D. Vance literally is trying to be portrayed as the tough guy. And this goes to the point that I'm making. Every move that has happened regarding the United States military since this new inauguration has been to do one thing: to project toughness. Project toughness. Teddy Roosevelt said it best: speak softly, carry a big stick. Okay? If you don't think other countries know America has a very powerful military, you're crazy. But here's the thing that I'm concerned about most with the name change. And by the way, this name change is happening. And in the same week here, today or yesterday, rather, Israel bombs Qatar because they're trying to get after Hamas that they believe has a base there, which this goes to the point. Miscalculation when dealing with military forces is extremely dangerous. So we sink that cartel boat, right? What happens the next time overflight happens with the Venezuelan Air Force over a Navy destroyer? Now, as someone who's been in the seat and had to deal with that in real life, I'm telling you right now, there are moments where we could kick off a war in Venezuela when that happens, just because we're there.
Right.
We weren't asked to be there. We're there. And then the other piece of this too, Sam, is the fact that Trump had to personally tell Qatar that, hey, Israel will never do this again. Number one, because, they're giving them a $400 million airplane. And the fact that it is blatantly apparent that Netanyahu and the government of Israel do not give a damn what Trump says, right? And you have forces in the region, just like when we bombed Iran. This Department of War moniker change is at the absolute worst time, because everything is happening. We're the ones that are putting it in play. We're the ones that sent the B-2 bombers into Iran. We're the ones that sent Fourth Fleet down to Venezuela. We're the ones. And now we're changing the name. How would the rest of the world perceive that?
The fact that it's inscrutable, any of this strategy, the name change, the sending service members into American cities, sort of collapsing our own system. It is, if I were the head of a military of another country,
yes.
You talk about needing off ramps, being able to provide your adversaries and allies alike with a way out of a tense situation. This is a house of mirrors. There's no visible path to any sort of reason or rationality in any of these systems. And so what is the ultimate end of this?
We're painting ourselves into a corner because a couple of things have happened since the second Trump administration has kicked off. Let's just go down the list here.
Yeah.
You have the name change. I'm going most recent here, but then you had the B-2 bombing mission, which was meant to be spectacular and meant to be a distraction. Let's not forget that. The deployment of Fourth Fleet, like you mentioned, the National Guard deploying to DC and now trying to deploy in other cities, right? Here's what's amazing to me. The only major piece of legislation that's been passed was the One Big Beautiful Bill, which, believe you me, we'll talk about in detail eventually, but it's terrible. Yeah. There has been no diplomatic real breakthroughs. I know Trump tried to claim that he stopped 6 different wars. The people who are actually fighting the wars all disagree with him, right? He has created a trade war, right? And then, in my humble opinion, a war on intellect, which I talked about last week on my Minor Such video, where he has attacked education from K to 12th grade to our most esteemed universities and service academies across the board. So he's declared war on education and intellect. He's declared war on trade. He has positioned himself to have war with Venezuela, Iran, all of these aggressive moves. And let me ask you a question. Throughout all of this, how often have you seen the Secretary of State? Not much. Not much. Unless he is trying to justify aggressive action. I have not seen him in the forefront of peace negotiations. I have seen the Attorney General be a law enforcement officer at her core instead of talking about policies to reduce crime, and working with local officials. Nope, we're just going to have an alligator Alcatraz or whatever name that we want to create. These are all aggressive terms. The Department of War is just the icing on the cake. Now, here's the thing. The Department of War is not a thing because Congress established the Department of Defense. It's up to Congress to change the name. Now they're using it as a secondary name, right? But make no mistake, it's a distraction. It's a projection. The man is obsessed with the war. However, he dodged the one war he should have been fighting, which I will never let anybody forget. As someone who has family members that are Vietnam vets and as a 26-year vet myself, I'm not going to let people forget the fact that he's now super tough when it's not him having to go, right? And at the same time, gutting the VA, just absolutely gutting it. And so what does this tell me? This tells me he is about posturing. This tells me when he had a chance to tell Putin to stop the Ukraine war to his face, he failed to do so. It tells me that every time he actually has to make a hard decision where he tells either Putin or Kim or any of those people, no, he would much rather march people down the streets of DC, march military down the streets of DC, much rather try to march people down the streets of Chicago and Baltimore and Philly or wherever else he wants to go. This is not a man who is about defense. He's about chaos, and war is the ultimate form of chaos. So the name change doesn't shock me, but what really shocks me is they think that the name is going to stick. It's not. It's not.
No, it's not.
No.
I think I said this last time you and I talked. This guy, two things. One, he reminds me of the kid who tells a lie on the playground and then sort of convinces friends that it's not a lie. He has to make a new lie, and then it just spirals out of control. And pretty soon, this lie is this wild made up story with a bajillion lies that none of them jibe. And it just doesn't make sense. And it feels like what Trump wants is just his ego to be stoked every second.
Very much so.
Every day. He wants to be told, "Oh, you're a good boy. Only good boys, only strong guys can touch the Stanley Cup. So here you go, Mr. Trump." Right. And I feel like in the beginning, all he wanted was to, maybe put on some fatigues or something and march in front of a bunch of tanks. You can't do that in a foreign nation. You can't. As stupid as Trump is, and as stupid as the people around him are, they're never going to say, "Yes, go ahead and invade." Maybe blow up a ship here or there, but whatever. The place he can invade, Chicago. He can invade DC. He can get his photo ops, and the people behind him, the Russell Voughts and all of those motherfuckers are cheering him on because it's part of their plan.
Right. And that's, I think you nailed it on the head, Sam. He wants that glorious military-like moment where he is seen as the ultimate form of toughness, of masculinity, of reverence. That's why he wanted the Army 250th parade. And he was sorely disappointed in what he got because none of the soldiers who actually put themselves on the line wanted to be there. And it was obvious. And so what we're seeing, like I said, this mentality of war, the war that he's fighting hardest is the war on intellect, where he's going after our schools. And here's now we're starting to see the why. The Heritage Foundation has talked about this at length. They want public education. They want education in general to fall off the face of the earth. They do not believe in public education because it's easier to manipulate an uneducated public. How are we seeing this? Yes, we know about everything that's happening in at the university level, and it's bad. A lot of clinical research trials and stuff that people are relying on to save lives is they're going away, and people they're not going to come back. But when you look at it K through 12, the amount of money that will be spent on our most vulnerable children, and I'm learning about public education through some friends of mine, and I'm stunned at what is happening. Our
Yeah.
kids are falling behind the rest of the world, and not only is the current administration cool with it, they're trying to make it happen by defunding different programs. They don't want kids to have, free breakfast, free lunch, especially if they are economically disadvantaged. They don't think that should be paid for. But hey, one big beautiful bill, you got tax breaks for billionaires. Make it make sense to me. And why does this matter? Because if you don't have an educated public, you're able to do what's happening in Florida right now.
Oh my
This
God.
whole vaccination issue in the state of Florida, one of our top 3 tourist states in America, where now vaccines not required. It's up to the parent. The same parents, by the way, who over COVID on Facebook became medical doctors, MDs, PhDs, everything, lawyers, they were everything and still think that they are. No training. But we're going to leave it up to the same people who are part of this public school system that has been consistently defunded. And now we're like, hey, forget what your doctor says that went to how many decades of schooling. You don't have to do anything for vaccines. When the first breakouts happened in Florida and people who were down there as tourists, those retirement communities down there, all of that, it will spread like wildfire. We've already
Yeah.
started seeing this in Texas with measles and stuff that we thought we had gotten rid of decades ago. But this is what's happening. An ignorant public
Yes.
will allow for ignorant actions, which means, hey, forget science, forget medical, forget all the stuff we spent the 20th century putting together. Sam, let me ask you a question. If you heard that in your home state, vaccines were no longer required, would you be happy with this? Would you be terrified of this? What would your thoughts be?
I mean, holy shit. I would be terrified. I've got 2 kids,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they're sick enough already in like January and February. We're home all the time with these coughs, and if there was any way that somebody said, look, you can either get sick or you cannot get sick. It seems like a
Mhm.
fairly simple choice, right? And the ignorance, as you said, throws this weird cast of doubt in people's brains, and these people, not all of them, but many of them, lack this ability to think critically, which goes back to exactly what you're talking about: the defunding and de-resourcing of public education. It
Yes.
seems to me like this is the big link in this show tonight. Is you take a Hegseth who is not just unqualified but ignorant of history,
Very
right?
much so.
And you take a Trump, and you take the Surgeon General in Florida. It is an not just an abject ignorance. It is a forceful kind of ignorance. It is a ignorance that
That's it.
I'm signaling to you that I'm going to continue to be ignorant because
Yes.
that is what
Yes.
I'm meant to be.
They are forcing your ability or inability to gain knowledge down your throat, right? The things that we're spending money on, like it's going to cost millions of dollars if they actually go through with this Department of War thing, right? Millions
Yeah.
of dollars that could be used to help alleviate student debt to go to college, to make it more accessible. The funding for college that the Department of Education, which is being dismantled, provides through FAFSA loans, to provide reduced breakfast and lunch for kids who cannot afford it. So they're not hungry as they sit in class, so they can actually focus. You see what I'm saying? Or to help pay for flu shots and vaccinations so elderly people are healthy and they have a chance during flu season. It's not a coincidence these things are happening in the manner of which they're happening. The country is becoming less safe, due through medical, in my opinion, medical policy malpractice, educational malpractice. Heck, R.F. Kennedy Jr. sitting in front of Congress the other day. It was so frustrating to watch because when he was called out on stuff that he said that everybody has the video clips on, he had the nerve to be indignant. His own family, the Kennedy family, basically disowns him
Yeah.
because of this. Think about that. But yet he's carrying the water because at the end of the day, they need Americans to be sicker. And as I said on my morning briefing this morning, it is projected that health insurance next year is going to go up 15% across the board. So it's going to become less affordable for you to become sick, even though you cannot prevent sickness because those things are being removed from you. So think about it like this. In this ultimate scenario, you send an 8-year-old kid to school. They're hungry. They may or may not get something to eat. Their immune system is low because they don't have nourishment and they can't concentrate. They pick up some type of virus, say it's the mumps or measles or something that we thought was eradicated because there's no vaccination. Kid comes home to you and then you take it to work. It's a spreader. You find out you're sick, but you can't take any days off because you can't afford to. And then when you find out you're sick, you don't have the health insurance to do anything for it. So you're just going to try to fight through it. And you continue to spread this. And now we have an epidemic that is easily avoidable. This is not science fiction that I'm saying, people. This is reality. And by the way, your kid is getting a subpar education while they're sitting there with no real prospects to go to college and change your family's social economic status. Welcome to America 2025. This is where we are. This is where we are. And it's only took 8 months for us to get here. So people, when you think this stuff does not matter to you, when you think it doesn't, the policies, the actions, they do matter. They affect every last one of us.
Bobby, that's incredible. And I think more people need to have that narrative lined up in front of them. But I want to present another narrative with the defunding of education. You take that same kid who's hungry, no access to food, lacks resources at home, and has one lifeline, and that's his school. Goes to school, teachers don't give a shit. They're underpaid. The school is falling apart. It is underfunded. You know what they are funding? Prisons.
Bingo.
And you know where that kid's going to end up? Because an uneducated population that lacks resources, that lacks hope, that lacks critical thinking skills,
right?
They don't have a chance. And this is the world that we're building. Those kids will build our future democracy. And we're not going to be able to count on them.
Or lack thereof. And here's the thing that I need to make sure I stress with people. Contrary to stereotypical belief, it's not just minorities where this is happening. When you go to these rural states, go down to Arkansas, the same Arkansas that had a prayer meeting for farmers who were about to lose their farms, 6th, 7th generation farmers about to lose it because of the tariffs and the economic policy that is directly affecting them, that they voted 31% more for Trump than Harris, that they voted for. Go see what's happening down there. You want to talk about fentanyl, you want to talk about drugs, led by his former press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. She's the governor. Just go take a look at what's happening in that state. Okay. So crime rate going up, drug use going up, family farms going down, going to be bought out by the conglomerate probably that JD Vance has major stock holdings in. Okay. Start connecting the dots, people. And like you said, if you have no economic prospects because you have no education, you're going to run the street. Why do you think? Go look at the stock portfolio of some of these GOP members and what they're investing in. Prison companies.
Yeah.
You think that's a coincidence? You think it's a coincidence that they did alligator Alcatraz as fast as they did? For them to move that fast means they had the plans on standby, people. Take it from me. The federal government does not move that fast unless they had plans ready to go. And the funding came not just from the federal government, but from the state of Florida as well. Make it make sense. So these are all the things that I'm saying. Look, I'm not about the rhetoric anymore. I never really have been, but I'm about the actions. When people show you what they are, believe them. And in every policy that we have talked about tonight, the United States is not made safer, it is not made stronger. It has become literally a bigger target. It has become weaker internally. And to be honest, what your grandfather was able to accomplish with his paycheck and your grandmother's paycheck and stuff, that is long since gone. And it's only getting worse. The wealth gap is increasing because of policies that we have self-selected. And most importantly, education, which in reality is access more than anything else. Access to universities, access to eliteness, all that is becoming less and less possible systemically in the United States of America. And that should concern everybody. That should concern everybody.
It really should. I want to read a comment from Sarah Brabs in the audience. It came in a little while ago, but then I want to ask a question to you, Bobby. She says, Trump and co. I hope Sarah's still watching. Sarah, signal if you are. Trump and co. want to start a conflict to be able to claim victory, victim/martyrdom, and react, and then shut down the U.S. while further scaring and normalizing a war mentality. She also says second is dehumanizing and getting people used to thinking in war terms. This goes back to that conversation. So I want to, the past 20 minutes of this conversation have been pretty, grim. I want to hear what you think the coalition of the future, of a positive future, looks like. Where are we going and what do we do?
Well, first of all, Sarah, she's got a keen eye. We've seen this historically, actually, in my lifetime. I remember when the first President Bush, H.W. Walker Bush, was accused of doing Desert Storm to try to get his poll numbers up after he reneged on the read my lips, no new taxes. I'm old enough to remember that. And then Desert Storm happened, and it was glorious. It was fast, and we had parades down D.C. It was the last time we had a parade before the Army 250th. And it did not work. He still lost to Clinton in 92, right? So why am I saying that? I'm saying that because I believe that the American people still have the ability to change course. The coalition, though, Sam, is going to be probably the strangest bedfellows we've seen in our lifetime. Those farmers that I talked about in Arkansas, and throughout the Midwest, they're pissed. They're pissed. And some of them have reluctantly started to admit that, hey, I voted for Trump for the wrong reasons, et cetera, et cetera. I think, number one, those people become truly independent. They're going to want to hear somebody come up with better ideas than what's happening now. Number two, I think you're going to see the intellectual elite, many of which you have historically believed they're above politics, now realize, oh my God, they can get to us too. So you're literally going to see, and this is happening. This is going to probably happen as we go into 2026, the midterm elections, and that's going to be the litmus test. You're going to see intellectual elites with Midwest farmers, with some by that point, because I believe the economic policies that we're seeing are going to be disastrous, with corporate bigwigs that are losing money because of the tariffs, right? And we're already seeing it. They just revised the job report today to less than they brought down 1 million jobs from the report they put out last month, which is saying something because you have a new Bureau of Labor Statistics in charge, and they're still like, we had 1 million jobs less. I think you're going to see that coalition be a center of this new grouping of people. Yeah, you're going to still have your classic leftist and your classic, center left, and then you're going to have your pragmatic center right. You're going to have that. But I think it's going to be those three in particular: the educational elite, the stock CEO types, which, and the reason I say that because the money will come.
Right.
But you're going to start seeing working class farmers and stuff like that come back if, and now this is the big if the Democrats develop a message that is not, we're not Trump, because that ain't going to work. We've seen that. If they can go back to the kitchen table, like they remember what it's like to be at the kitchen table and talk about what affects Americans, I think you have not just a legitimate shot. I think you can see a blue wave. Now, I'm not the head of the DNCC. I am not head of any political party. I'm head of Veterans for Responsible Leadership, where we advocate for leaders that are ethical and responsible in their veterans. But that being said, I think we're at this crossroads where I think a lot of people realize that what's happening at a fundamental ethical basis is wrong. There are people that have been scooped up and put in the vans that you saw with your own eyes, that you've seen before working hard for you and your neighbors. And you're just like, that ain't right. That had kids go to school with your kids. So you see this ethical dilemma that America's got to answer, but you see the pragmatic side of this too, that if the Democrats are smart, they'll be able to capitalize on. Because I'm gonna tell you right now, if 2026 does not flip at least the House, then America as we know it, I think, will cease to exist. That's what I think.
That sounds like the DNC calling to ask for your candidacy for the the leadership.
No, can't be me.
Yeah, to that end, I think that we in the media, we talk about, we have to cover the chaos of Trump. You have to cover it. You have to tell this story. This is history unfolding, right? But I think that we often, and we at Lincoln Square, we talk about this a lot. Democrats and the pro-democracy side, we need to start imagining the world that we want. Not the world, not only seeing the world we need to tear down in Trump.
Right.
We need to start building the world that we want. And that's the only way that we'll have hope and rally support.
Sam, not only are you right, that only starts by standing up to the pressure of the administration. So, for example, CBS has a new ombudsman that historically conservative to vet their stories. Why? First of all, they would have won the lawsuit that Trump had against them. Every dang lawyer that I've seen who looked at that case said the same thing. So why are we even here? Because they think that they're curry favor. But the thing about it is, there's Trump, there's MAGA, and then there's the aftermath. And the question that you got to ask yourself, network of Walter Cronkite, where do you stand historically here?
Right.
Where do you stand? I mean, I know it's a part of Paramount and all this other kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, you're supposed to be a news organization. That's why what's going on with Lincoln Square and what we're doing and all that, it's like, look, you've seen me now enough to know I'm not sitting there rallying like, yeah, we're going to say, I'm giving you facts in context. That's all I'm trying to do. If the Democrats do something stupid and it's facts, I can provide context. I will do the same to them too.
Yep.
Because at the end of the day, people, we are all we got right now.
That's it.
There have been a ton of lives that were sacrificed to establish this country, and the right to freedom of speech and the right of freedom of press are just as important as your precious Second Amendment.
Yeah.
If not more important. So we have to do our part to make sure that we put that story out, like you said, Sam, and push for it.
Along those lines, I have one more question from the audience as we start to wrap up. It's from Patrick Schelling. He says, could you say something? You've talked about this a little bit before, but the field keeps changing, right? Could you say something about National Guard, other military, and whether they will stay on the side of democracy, or will they, some of them at least, blindly follow orders along with ICE?
Well, I will say this, and I've said it before. Again, the officers of the United States military take a different oath than the enlisted. The officers make no allegiance to the president. They do not have the line to obey the orders of the president like the enlisted do. And the officers are who the enlisted are supposed to follow. That's the fail-safe, number one. Number two, I do believe that even though right now it sucks that the military is doing what they're doing in DC with the National Guard, it's legal. It's still a legal order. We don't, unfortunately, the military, we can't just pick and choose the orders we want to follow. If it's legal, then we do it, which is why the first act that Trump did with the Department of Defense when he came in was gut the JAG Corps, the military lawyers, got rid of all of the senior ones because they needed to have enablers at the top. Now, that being said, I think people, to include the Supreme Court of the United States, understands how serious this matter is if the president is allowed to deploy troops anywhere he wants on domestic soil. I am dying to see what they rule, because it's coming. It's coming. And even if they rule that he can do it, then you got to ask yourself, what is Congress going to do about it? Because what if a Democrat's in office and he sends troops into, I don't know, freaking Indianapolis or Topeka, Kansas, or, Omaha, Nebraska? You can't do for one what you can't do for the other. Although I'm sure their mindset is there'll never be another Democrat in office, etc. But understand this, people: the military follows legal orders. Right now, these orders are legal until the court system says it's not. And so that is what Trump is banking on. He's banking on what Ryan Powers talked about earlier, the delay in the timeline, and able to execute all this. So eventually, when they say no, the damage is already done. Now, as far as ICE and all those organizations, they are legal law enforcement agents that can go on American soil. That is your difference. But what they're doing masterfully and very diabolically is they're combining that National Guard to support those federal agencies and saying that the federal agencies are the lead, the Guard is in support. It's a bold-faced lie, but that's what they're doing to try to skirt it, which is why these cases have to get in front of the Supreme Court so they can be ruled upon. Do I think if American military were told to turn their weapons on the American citizens, I do think we would not do it. I think I couldn't do it. I can tell you that right now. I'm like, you have to court martial me. I'm not shooting Americans on American soil. I can't. But that's just me.
Well, your lips to God's ears, Bobby.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Well, everyone, we should probably wrap up. I could go on forever with you, Bobby. This is thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No, man. No, I appreciate it. I like your perspective, because you're plugged in to what's going on. And sometimes I will get too deep in the weeds in my own mind. It's like, wait, am I crazy for thinking this? But I think we, all of us collectively at Lincoln Square, we're giving you these various perspectives because we see how important they are. Be interesting to see what the combined experience of all the guys and girls that are on this network, what they have. But it's a lot in various areas, so we try to keep you covered.
Yeah, it's a lot. And in fact, I was going to say, I've been thinking about this a little bit. Some of the comments in the chat are talking about Project 2025 and white nationalism. I'm talking to Andrea Watkins tomorrow morning, and she covers Project 2025. She's incredible. But it's the ability to have conversations like the ones we had, Bobby, and then talk about Project 2025, and then have Stuart Stevens talk about Rubio, and connect all of these dots. It almost feels like a beautiful mind, where he's like,
really is. It really is.
But it's for real. These are for real connections, and I just appreciate you so much.
No, I appreciate you, Sam. Thanks for having me on. Everybody, thanks for listening. And once again, we'll be back next week, but we'll try to keep you informed. Hopefully, we don't have to come on here in an emergency session. Let's keep our fingers
but we will if we have to.
Yep, sure will.
All right. See you next week, Bobby.
Thanks, everyone. Yep, same here. Thanks.